Oh, I guess there's no stair. You just leap up, don't you? Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess I should have scouted that out earlier, or if it's obvious enough, I should have picked up on that. Thank you so much, Lynn Sue, and thank you all. Thank you, SRP, for having me back again. We did this about a year and a half ago in the same room, and for some reason, I still showed up at the wrong hotel. So I don't know what that story says about me. My name is Park Howell. I've been in this branding, marketing, advertising world for an awfully long time, and one of the things that has really empowered me over the past decade is this growth of storytelling in our business world, in our brand world, especially through the work now that I'm doing with ASU and the School of Sustainability to help folks just like you create brands and build them from the heart so that you can connect with people, with audiences, be they employees, be they customers, be they shareholders, like you never have before. And then what I want to do today over the course of the next 30 minutes is show you how that works. And at your tables, you've got a small handbook that you can take back with you because I want you to be able to apply this immediately in your life and in your business. And there's a little worksheet there. Now, I'm not going to make you do a whole lot of work right here. I'm just going to take you through it, give you the high-level touches on it. And, if you have any questions afterwards, I'll be here for you. I'm a big believer in own your story to grow your brand, because you really have to own it first before anybody's going to buy into it. Now, we've got this process. It's been put into a workbook, and if any of you are online during this and you're tweeting, tweet something about this great event here and what SRP means to you. Use the hashtag #OwnYourStory, and after this later today, I'll go back and I'll pull a name out of one of those tweets, and I'll send you the free interactive e-workbook so you can actually start going deep with your brand story immediately following the program. Let me tell you a little bit more about mine. Been in the advertising business for 30-some years. And it used to be really easy back in the day. And what I mean by that is when we only had to deal with TV, radio, print, outdoor, direct mail, events, public relations, it was a lot easier than it is today. In fact, I often point out that brands used to own the influence of mass media. But as we know, technology has completely changed all of that, and now the masses are the media. The masses own your story. Brands become the story makers. You hand those stories off to your customers and let them become the storytellers on your behalf. So it's very important to be very, very intentional about how you tell these stories. It's no longer just one and done through any sort of medium. We have to engage them and get them into the program. Now, the interesting thing about this, as we all know, is we can be our own TV station, radio station, producer, publisher of anything we want 24/7 on innumerable channels, and we can reach the entire world out there. So on one hand, it's this wonderful democratization of being able to communicate, but it also creates an immense amount of competition for our messages. And in fact, I would state now that I believe ADHD has become a communicable disease, and we are all the viruses. Because every tweet you send, every tweet you read, every text you send, you read, is now competition for your brand story as well. Now, compound that with everybody else in the room and everybody else in the world, and you'll see how difficult it is to stand out with old traditional ways of advertising and marketing and telling your brand story. That's why storytelling is truly more important now than ever. Story is the antidote to the attention economy. It's how you stand out. So my next question, show of hands here. How many in the room feel like you're a pretty good storyteller, confident in your storytelling? Way up. Be confident in that. All right, good. We got a good Lynn Sue. I expected that out of you. Typically, when I ask that question, maybe 10% of the room hands go up. In fact, I was doing this presentation to 600 professional content marketers in San Diego last April, and I asked that question figuring I'd get at least half the room to raise their hand. Again, about 10%. And I think the reason why is we were all at the tops of our storytelling games in kindergarten. I'm not even kidding. Think about it, Think of the stories you lived every day and you told and had fun with your friends and you sat down. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times my mom and dad would say, "Park, Stop telling stories. And then you get into school. Start drawing between the lines, sit up, be quiet, learn by rote, not by lore. I went to a parochial school, and we had confession every Wednesday afternoon. So I made a habit of it, of going in and sitting across from Dr. Father McGurl in there, and I would see how long I could last. And when I would come out, my buddies would say, geez, what'd you do this week? You were in there an awful long time. I said, no, I had a captive audience. I could tell them any story I wanted. And then we get into our corporate lives. We don't do that here in this company. No, that's not the way we want to talk about that. Think about all the times our innate storytellers are told to be quiet and shushed. We see it throughout our lives. But now the great advent is what has happened with technology, social media and channels, and it now gives us the permission. In fact, it begs us, it pleads us to reignite within us the one true superpower we all have, and that is the power of story. If you think about it, think about even the simplest of email that maybe you sent to a complete stranger asking them to do something, and you wrote it so well, you're like, yes, I nailed that. And you found out after the fact that they actually did what you asked them to do. You had this string on them that pulled them into action. It's because you probably captured and triggered that innate storyteller in you, and you moved them to action. That's what stories can do in all of our lives. And it's here to stay, and I want to let you know that it's in all of you. My job today is to show you how you can become more intentional about it so that you can literally take your brand, be that your personal brand of influence or your professional brand of your company, to anywhere you want, to grow to any heights. Let me show you an example of some really wonderful storytelling.
Thing even on?
Yeah, that means it's recording.
We all love stories. We're born for them. They can't be artificially evoked. It doesn't always mean plot or fact.
Take 48,327.
They aren't an actual exact science. That's what's so special about stories. They're not predictable. It's capturing a truth from your experience. It can cross the barriers of time, real and imagined. Expressing values you personally feel deep down to your core.
Look at what that giant, ubiquitous search engine company just did to you. I mean, do you feel completely different about that organization now? And something as simple as a 60-second spot that talks about the importance of storytelling in our lives, and that they're there to help you ignite your storytelling through all of their products and services, and certainly their search. Now, I pull that out because that spot ran once. It ran during the Academy Awards in 2013, and the voiceover on that is a gentleman by the name of Andrew Stanton. Now, Andrew Stanton was one of the founders of Pixar. He has this wonderful TED Talk. So your first homework assignment, because again, now that I work at ASU, I always have to give my classes a homework assignment, is to go and listen to this. And my only caution is he tells an extraordinarily off-color joke at the very beginning, which is a little bit out of place, but after that, it's wonderful. And what he talks about is Pixar's troubling times in it's their origin story. They spent 2 years and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to perfect Toy Story. And in their brash, creative ways, they went in and they said, you know what, we're going to break every rule to storytelling, and we're going to make a company called Pixar that doesn't do it like anybody else. Well, they almost drove that company in the ground before we got Toy Story and all the other wonderful stories that came out of that. They had to hire a story consultant that came in, looked at all of their work, and basically looked at them and said, where's your story? Why aren't you following story? So once they got into this universal structure of the story, I mean, the rest is history. And I let you know that because storytelling is not a gimmick. It's the way our brains are hardwired to make meaning out of the madness of being human beings. Now, I didn't learn this just from Andrew Stanton. Our son, Parker, he grew up here, went to Arcadia High School, was a film buff from a little kid. I showed him how to make stop-action videos with Legos when he was a little guy, and he produced a bunch of them. He made films at Arcadia High School. He and his buddy Will Walsh got a film in the Phoenix Film Festival when they were seniors in high school. So he went on to study film at Chapman University in Orange, California, and he graduated in 2010, and now he's in downtown Hollywood. He's a motion graphics artist. You see his work on Dancing with the Stars. He even was on the Beatles' 50th anniversary a couple years ago on CBS. Do you remember that, when they were showing that show? He did the amazing Imagine Dragon motion graphics behind Imagine Dragon Singing Revolution. I'm a proud papa, of course, letting you know this. So when we watch it, I call him up. I said, dude, that was so cool. I can't believe it. And he's like, yeah, Dad, that was your band. He was already on to something else. But I mean, he was into this wholeheartedly. And while he was going to school at Chapman, which is not an inexpensive place to go to school, thank good he's really smart because he got a decent scholarship too, I said, I want you to send me your textbooks when you're done with them. I want to vet the education you're getting. What do they actually teach you to be competitive in the most competitive storytelling market in the universe? And number two, as an advertising, branding, marketer, communicator, what could I learn from, basically take the course alongside of him that we could use in our line of work? Some of the first work he showed me, introduced me to, was the work of Joseph Campbell. How many of you are familiar with Joseph Campbell? I only kind of knew of him before this. Joseph Campbell is America's foremost mythologist. He passed away in 1987, but not before writing several books on the story, the hero's journey, this universal structure to story that he first found in the Iroquois Indian nation, and then started studying other Native American cultures and found this exact same story pattern playing out. Well, and then he found it in religions, and he found it in ancient times and modern times. And it's now when you watch something on TV, when you listen to that song that really works for you, when you watch a movie that really pulls you in, you will see, if not all, but the majority of the elements of what he called the hero's journey in that particular piece of work. I literally do this every single time I give this presentation. You cannot believe, I did this for the Arizona Librarians Association, and I just love the irony of me teaching librarians about storytelling. And I had one lady said, oh, it's a bunch of kids chasing butterflies. So I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. One time at my office, I was doing it for a group of 12, and a lady sitting right here, and she says, well, it's obviously Romeo and Juliet. You all saw that, didn't you? And everybody's looking around the table, no, not really. And so I asked the guy next to her, what did you see in the video? He said, well, I saw a sperm trying to impregnate an egg. So when I told that to our creative director, Luis, he says, oh, great, your little Rorschach video took him from Shakespeare to Porky's all in one fell swoop. But what is interesting to me about this, and I hope you'll see it too, is did you see how your brain had to manufacture some kind of story to create some kind of meaning out of nothing but data going on the screen? There were no voices, there was no faces, there was no music, there was an editing that may suggest something, but it's totally data. So my big question to you is, when you are giving presentations, when you go to your website, when you are sharing your advertising and marketing, and you got a bunch of bullet points and features and benefits and blah, 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 what are your customers, what story are your customers making up about you? Chances are it's going to be incorrect. It's not the story that you want to have told, because our brains, as meaning-making machines, are designed to make meaning out of everything. In fact, I would say that story is as important to our brains for survival as oxygen is to our lungs. We have the graphic up. There it is. I worked really hard on that graphic. I want to make sure that you saw that. But it really comes down to it. It's ultimately survival, and I see that more now than ever, especially with my work in the School of Sustainability. Well, Joseph Campbell found this. He's got the 17 steps to the hero's journey. And as Lynn Sue mentioned, I studied music composition and theory in school because I knew I'd never make a dime being a musician, but I was fascinated by how the masters put it together. Well, when I started seeing this through what Hollywood was teaching our son at Chapman University, I'm going, oh my God, this is how story comes together. And if we could be way more intentional about how we do that as brand and persuaders, could we be a lot more effective? That was my hypothesis out there. So we took his 17 steps to the hero's journey, and we boiled it down to these 10 steps. And at the time, we were actually working through some branding for some clients. I don't know if any of you know Aveen Tafoya of Adelante Healthcare, amazing CEO, a real treasure of the Valley. She was one of our first guinea pigs, and she jumped right on. And we took her through redesigning their brand story, the 30-year-old community health clinic, into what they are today, Adelante Healthcare, Sustainable Healthcare for All. They, by the way, have experienced 300% growth over the last 5 years. She doesn't advertise and she doesn't do any public relations because she says, we can't handle any more growth right now. But that's how powerful this is. So what I want to do, if you've got your little book there, I'm going to very quickly take you through the 10 steps, and don't expect to, download all of this stuff. I've got a resource site at the end of this that then you can use, and you can do this on yourself. But I want to show you what screenwriters know, the hero's journey, how great storytellers, you can use those secrets to work on your own brand, be it a professional brand or a personal brand. We start with the backstory. Backstory is just like, where have you been? Where are you now? Where are you going? We all have this backstory. We just simply need to set the stage. In brand marketing parlance, it's creating your position statement. What do you do better than anybody else? So that's where you want to start your story. But now we don't want it to be an operationally driven story. We want you to start leveling that up because, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we want to get you out of that basal part of the pyramid and get your audiences up into enlightenment. And that's what, when you start telling stories, it does for you. Next up is, who's your hero? This is chapter 2. Target audiences. Now, this is really important because I guarantee you, when I asked who's your hero, you immediately put yourself at the center of the story, your brand at the center of the story, and that's okay. That's only human. But what I want you to do is think about your audience. Just as if you were creating a great screenplay, you got to know who is going to be in that audience and who's going to take that in and watch it and share it with others. Same thing is true with your brand. Who is that number one audience? Who cares? And start thinking about, the more you learn how to do this, you can see the hero's journey that your audience is on, so that you know which stories to tell them at what point of their journey to connect them with your product, brand, service, or offering. It's so powerful. I just want to underscore, use it for good and not evil. All right? Number 3, what's at stake? Every story, chapter 3 in this case, is there's got to be something at stake. There's got to be something that can be gained by involving themselves with your brand. And just as important, what do they stand to lose by staying in status quo? If they do absolutely nothing, it's really important to understand that, because that needs to get often woven into your story as well. So what's at stake for your audience? What do they stand to gain? And what do they stand to lose by not doing something with you? Chapter 4, the call to adventure. Hollywood calls this the inciting incident. Think about, what was the inciting incident in The Wizard of Oz that got that story going? The tornado. Totally turned Dorothy's world upside down. She's whisked into Oz and color and everything. Your brand has to have, your market has to have an inciting incident or a call to adventure. So you've got to do this. Either you are responding to something that has happened in the marketplace, or you are that disruptive force that is creating something so new and wonderful that people just have to have it. If you don't have this in your stories, when you sit down to think about it, then you don't have a story. Something's wrong. Something is probably that you are trapped in status quo and you're not getting the growth you want to have. So this is when you have to start writing some fiction and start thinking about, what is the disruption I want to be, or what is happening out there that I can respond to, aspire to, and then live into that fiction. Make it a nonfiction story. But you've got to have this, a disruption. This is where your unique value proposition really comes into play. It takes your position statement and now starts humanizing it. It says, here's what I bring to you, and here's how I can make your life different. Next up, villains, fog, and crevices. Or crevasses, depending on what part of the country you're presenting this in. This is about the obstacles and antagonists that we all come in contact with. Who are the villains? Who's literally the competition that is out to thwart our progress, both externally and that villainous voice inside our heads that tells us we're not good enough, strong enough, fast enough to do it? The fog, where are the blind spots? Often our customers aren't buying from us because they're just simply blind to what we truly have to offer. How can you tell stories to get them to clear out that blind spot, that fog, to really understand how you can empower them and move them forward? And then the crevices are the gaps. We all have performance gaps. So what are the gaps in your brand story where you're saying one thing, but you're actually doing something else? This is where a story can be hugely powerful in an organization, because when you get your story right and you're courageous enough to make it an inspirational and aspirational story, then these gaps are going to widen. But now you have a tremendous mission that you can get your team on board to close those gaps, and you become a better, stronger, faster company when that happens. Chapter 6 of the story cycle process is enter the mentor. In your customer's life, this is where you come in. You are Glenda Goodwitch of the North to Dorothy, or you're Obi-Wan to Luke Skywalker, or Yoda to Luke Skywalker. By the way, did you know that the mentor or guide position is the single most important position in every story? Without that, we really don't have a story, because you think about it, none of us have ever achieved anything of any significance without somebody helping us, a sidekick, a mentor, or guide. Well, that's what you play. In this day and age of narcissism and selfies and all that, we get locked in our brains that we as the brand are the center of the story, and we're not. Our audiences are always the center of the story. You play a way more valuable job of being the mentor guide. In this particular process, what you really want to start doing is thinking about the emotional promise that people experience by operating, coming in contact with your brand. Everything from internal, from employees to your audiences. What is the actual gift they get by interacting with you? Not just what you sell, but what is the gift? What is their takeaway? And then we get into personalities. Are you familiar with Carl Jung? He, famous Swiss psychologist. He did this whole study on these 12 basal archetypes that we all have hardwired in our brain, that we size situations up and we size people up with these 12 basic archetypes. We found this is invaluable when you put the study on your brand to try to truly understand what is the authentic personality that you use to go to market with. And how does it get expressed then through your website, through your materials, through your people, through everything, to try to understand what your archetype is. That's what you do in this portion of the story cycle process. Next up, the road of trials. This is where you actually get to talk about features and benefits. I would never take that away from you, because we all love bullet points and listicles, don't we? They're easy to do. But in this case, this is where you really want to connect that feature with ultimately that benefit, and we like to look at it in 3 primary customer journey points as you're taking them on your story. That's simply brand awareness, brand adoption, brand appreciation. The more you study story and understand it and can appreciate where your audience is on their hero's journey, the better you can connect your stories with where they are in your brand journey. So if they're just learning about you, what stories do you tell to beckon them in that first date? They adopt you. They like it. They're going to give you a try. They're going to buy something. What stories do you tell them at that point to welcome them aboard and keep them moving forward and make some promises to them that you have to live up to? And then brand appreciation is they're coming back for more. They're really starting to talk about you. They love you. You're becoming a part of their life. That's where this whole chapter comes in to get you thinking about how this all plays out in your brand storytelling. Now, we end on our last couple chapters. This is where we're really starting to level things up. We just talked about brand awareness, brand adoption, brand appreciation. Now, you got to ask yourself, how are you going to celebrate each one of those journey points with them? When they do first learn about you, what do you give them that gives them a little bit of a victory that says, this is cool. Maybe they haven't bought anything from you yet. That next point, when they do buy in, what do they get? How do you add value? How do you level them up there? Then when they get to the appreciation side, how do you start arming them with your stories so that they become your storyteller, your marketing department essentially on your behalf? Chapter 9, the moral of your story, probably my favorite chapter, because what this ultimately comes down to is you got to get very real with what you offer beyond making money. So I just simply ask you a question. Put your brand in there and say, we exist to do what? Now, an example of that is what I do in this day and age. The Business of Story, my storytelling platform, exists to help people live into their most powerful stories. It's not something I thought was going to happen, but it came out of this. When we started working with brands and seeing how powerful this was, I then started getting the leadership coming up, saying, whoa, this is the first time I've ever had consensus about anything. And in fact, Jim's leaving the company because this isn't his story. This isn't what he wants to be about. So I started doing some more studying on that, and I realized that this storytelling is so primal to us all, so basal, that it goes beyond advertising and marketing and selling stuff. It ultimately comes down to what kind of story are you living into, and how is it being expressed through your brand, and can you get to a brand purpose like this? And you probably already have them. If you don't, really sit down and ask yourself, we exist to help people do what? Goes beyond you making money. It's how do you level people up. Finally, in all of this, we have to keep a business model going, so it's about brand rituals. You know, Hollywood knows this better than anybody else. 007 is what, into its like 25th, 26th movie. You know, talking about a powerful franchise. Even as they change out the leading character, the leading actor, they know that audience, you know, and they keep bringing the goods time and time again. How do you design brand rituals to keep people coming back more and more, to see that next revolution, to experience that next revolution of the story cycle with your brand? 3 major points I want to make at this point as I wrap up. When you start writing your story is not about what you make, but it's what you make happen. And it all starts by truly understanding what you do better than anybody else. So it used to be that being the Swiss Army knife, I can deliver anything and everything to you, worked when we weren't living in a land of abundance, when we're all commodities and everybody does everything that we do. So it's more important now than ever to understand what that one thing is you do better than anybody else. A simple way to do that, there's a card on your table. After this, you know, when you go back to your office today, quickly fill out this card. The very first question is going to ask that. What do you do better than anybody else? Get very clear with that. The second most important question is who cares? You know, I could be the best ballet dancer in the room, but none of you would care. So what do you do that people care about, and who is that number one audience? Just like the raving lunatics that used to follow the Beatles around. What do you do that develops raving lunatics, and who are they, so that you can connect with their stories? And then I want to end on a quick story. Anyone know who this guy is? And I dare you to say his last name. I just keep coming up with meta-shits. I don't know how else you say that. Dietrich. Born in Austria, 1940s. His father was a PhD. His mother was an English teacher, I believe. And at a very young age, they divorced, separated, and so he was bounced from home to home to home and having a hard time figuring out where he was going to land next. He spent 10 years at Vienna Business School trying to graduate, figuring out what he's going to do. He did ultimately graduate. He got a degree in marketing. He went to work for Unilever for a while. Pretty unfulfilling for him, and he jumped over to a company there called Blendax, which is now owned by Procter & Gamble, and he literally became a toothpaste salesman. And he was running around doing everything he could possibly figure out to do to sell toothpaste throughout Europe. Well, one trip, he was in Taiwan. And he was in a truck stop in Taiwan, and he was just kind of trying to figure out what the heck he's going to do with his life after all this. And he noticed that these truck drivers were all drinking this drink, this energy drink. And he started talking to some of them and found out that, you know, they drive a long time. They didn't quite have the regulations America has, and so these guys were doing everything they could to stay awake. Well, he noticed that in Japan, another guy was selling an energy drink very similar to this and making a lot of money on it. So he and a buddy went in, and they came up, scratched together $500,000 apiece, all they had, and they bought what is now Red Bull. What drove this guy, Dietrich, is his love of mythology. And he says everybody loves mythology, everybody loves story. And Zeus was his favorite, the king of all gods. And what drove him is, he said, you know, he came down to Europa to save the land, and he turned into a bull when that happened. And that became the foundation for everything that is Red Bull today. So he launched in Austria in April 1, 1987, had zero money for marketing, no money for marketing. So they started creating these stunts because he knew if we could get really outlandish with these stunts, people would come and watch it, media would pick it up, and it would also be an expression of this energy drink. By the way, he single-handedly invented the energy drink market when he brought Red Bull into Austria, and then ultimately into the U.S. Felix Baumgartner became a good friend of his, and one time he was trying to expand into France, and France wouldn't let him in because they thought he was making medical claims with his Red Bull product. So what does he do? He puts a jetpack on his buddy Felix. He launches him from England, flies over the channel, and lands him in France. It's kind of a shot across the bow. It wasn't that much longer after that that he got into France. And a few years later, he had Felix jumping out of his Red Bull capsule for the longest jump ever. Well, you know Red Bull. I mean, they are everywhere. They have a publishing empire. They have a music empire. They have a film empire, and all about selling a very basic commodity, that a commodity you can find anywhere now, but they still own 46% of the world market. Why? Because he gives us wings. Red Bull is not just an energy drink, it's all about giving us wings. So this is the final thing that I really want you to think about. When you're telling your stories, again, don't tell the stories about what you make. That's a commodity. Tell your stories about what you make happen in the lives of your customers. Tell stories of what you make happen in your employees' lives and show them how they get leveled up every time they come in connection with your brand. It's a very courageous, powerful story to tell, but it's a story that causes you, makes you live into it, and you'll become a better brand, a stronger brand, and you will have no competition when you do that. So I hope this has given you some wings to your brand storytelling. I know I've thrown a lot at you. I've got a resource out here, thebusinessofstory.com. I've got a ton of tools there for you. I've got a library of everything I've read that has informed me about this that will work with you. I do a weekly podcast called Business of Story, where I connect story artists from around the world with business leaders and communicators so that you can learn how to craft and tell compelling stories that sell through people who actually make a living doing this. And again, I've got this tool. If you're on Twitter, when you're out there, I want you to give a huge shout out to SRP and what this whole organization means to you. Use the hashtag and we'll pick up, we'll find a winner at the end of the day, and I'll shoot you a note on that. And finally, I'd like to leave you with this. Always remember this: the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So please make it a good one. Thank you very much. Thank you.